Emma Wells wasn't the kind of person who turned heads when she entered a room. She didn't make an impression with her voice, nor did her presence leave a mark. In a place designed for silence, a city's old stone library, Emma seemed to dissolve into the air, as if she were part of the marble walls, the solemn bookshelves, and the quiet amber light filtering through stained glass windows. For the past 3 years, her routine had remained unchanged. Arrive before 8, slip into a pale gray uniform, tie her hair into a neat bun, and return misplaced books to their rightful homes. Every day, she served people in a hurry. Sometimes a history professor lost in dusty tomes, other times a tired mother with a crying child. They all passed by Emma as if she weren't there, and strangely, that made her feel safe. Emma often believed she was born not to be seen. She wasn't beautiful, not striking, didn't have a commanding voice or a gaze that sparked intrigue. But when her hands brushed against a book spine, when her eyes lingered on a favorite stanza, she felt alive. In those moments, she wasn't a shadow. She was a soul whispering quietly to the world. And then, on a morning that looked like any other, he walked in, and everything began to change. That morning, Emma pushed the book cart toward the elevator like she always did. The wheels creaked softly, a familiar song in the quiet library. She murmured to herself, "Third floor? Art history section?" One hand gently held a misplaced poetry book someone had left among cookbooks, a slim, deep blue volume titled Between the Unspoken Lines by Eliza Moore, her favorite poet. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in, eyes still fixed on the page. Suddenly, a student rushed in, bumping into the cart. 3 books fell to the floor. Emma bent down to pick them up. As she reached for the last one, another hand grabbed it first. "Allow me," said a warm, deep voice. She looked up. The man wore a navy suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his gray eyes calm. But it wasn't his appearance that stunned her. It was the way he looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but truly at her. "Eliza Moore," he said, flipping gently through the book. "This one has a poem I love." Emma clutched the volume closer. In 3 years working at the library, no one had ever recognized that name. "You know her?" she whispered. He smiled. "Real love doesn't make a sound, it breathes between the silence of 2 eyes meeting," he quoted softly. She had never felt so seen. She didn't know his name, but when he handed her the book, it was like he returned a piece of her soul. The elevator doors opened. He stepped out, paused, then turned back. "I'm Julian Hart. I hope to see you again, librarian of quiet poems." For the first time in years, Emma forgot where she was supposed to go, because for the first time, someone had truly seen her. Julian Hart returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time he walked straight to the checkout desk where Emma worked, wearing a quiet smile and armed with a question about books. "Could you help me find a modern poetry collection, something a bit lesser known but deeply felt?" he asked, eyes gleaming as if setting a gentle challenge. Emma nodded, hiding the smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She knew exactly what to recommend. "Nights and the Things Left Unsaid" by Celia Rowan, she said, pulling a slim volume from her personal cart, the place she kept her most cherished books. "Not many borrow it, but it gets right to the heart." Julian received the book with both hands, like accepting a precious gift. "I trust your recommendations, librarian of silences." From that moment, they kept crossing paths between the shelves, not always talking, sometimes just a glance, a quiet nod, or a soft smile when their fingers brushed the same spine. One afternoon, while Emma was reshelving in a quiet corner on the 3rd floor, she heard familiar footsteps. Julian stood nearby, holding a poetry book with a thoughtful expression. "You always seem to know exactly what I need to read," he said. "I wonder, do you ever write?" Emma paused. "Write?" The journals, the poems she had penned since she was 15, lay buried in a drawer, unread by anyone but her. "I used to," she whispered, "but I've never shown them to anyone." Julian smiled, warm, steady. I believe the best writers are often the ones no one has read yet. They write from truth. That line struck deeper than anything Emma had ever heard. In that fleeting moment, she realized, with Julian, she didn't have to hide behind book covers anymore. "Do you know Cafe Reverie down the street?" Julian asked one Friday afternoon, as the last light of the day spilled through the library's stained windows. Emma looked up from the checkout ledger and nodded slightly. "The one with exposed brick walls and bookshelves that reach the ceiling?" "That's the one. I go there sometimes to read on weekends," he hesitated, then added, "I thought it might be nicer with someone else reading beside me." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't the kind of person people invited places, but with Julian, she didn't feel fear, just a strange, quiet calm. "I finish work at 6, she whispered. He smiled. "I'll wait." The cafe was warm and hushed, like a gentle breath. They chose a table by the window, where amber light glowed softly over the worn wooden surface. Against the walls, first editions, antique poetry, and sun-faded books stood like silent witnesses. "Thank you for coming," Julian said, as Emma set her tea down. "I know noisy places aren't your world." "They're not with everyone," she murmured. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but comfortable, like the blank page between two chapters. No need to rush. No need to fill it. Julian placed his hand on the table, not touching hers, just near enough for her to feel its warmth. "I used to think I lived in the light," he said. "I had everything: career, reputation, meetings, obligations, but sometimes I felt invisible, in the middle of the crowd." Emma looked at him. For the first time, she saw the man behind the tailored suit, someone just as lonely as she was. "So do I," she said softly. "Except I got used to not being seen." He tilted his head, eyes tender. "I see you. From the very first day." Emma's breath caught. Those words were simple, yet to her they were a declaration. The city lights outside shimmered like falling dust, and in a quiet corner of a vintage cafe, two people who once felt unseen were beginning the first chapter of something real. "Would you like to see my personal library?" Julian asked as they left the cafe, his hand gently holding the door open into the soft hush of an early autumn night. Emma hesitated, not out of fear, but because this was a moment she had only read about in books, a quiet invitation not just into a home, but into someone's private world. Julian's apartment was a blend of quiet elegance and thoughtfulness. Cream walls, bookshelves lining every wall from floor to ceiling, soft lighting like melted candlelight. In the center stood a long wooden table covered in books, mostly poetry. The rest, rare editions and handwritten manuscripts. "You're welcome to look around," he said, removing his coat and placing it on an armchair. "Be gentle with the left shelf. Some of those first editions are as fragile as memories." Emma walked slowly among the shelves, her fingers drifting over the spines of aged leather-bound books. Here, she felt safe, not because he was there, but because the words were. Familiar, understanding, tender. "You have the soul of a collector," Julian said from behind her. "Not for value, but for emotion." Emma turned. Their eyes met, a gaze that wasn't rushed or demanding. It simply waited. They sat on the sofa, bathed in amber light. Julian poured 2 glasses of red wine, handing her one. "I reread the poetry collection you recommended," he said, "and I think something in it felt like yours." "Fine?" she asked softly. "The way you choose words, the rhythm, the pauses. It felt like you... quiet, but enough to make someone stop." Emma didn't know what to say, and in that moment Julian reached out, not grabbing, just placing his hand near hers. She set her hand upon it, trembling slightly. When he leaned in, everything slowed, not out of urgency, but reverence. Their first kiss was feather-light, as if they were learning to read each other not in words, but through skin. They weren't in a hurry. Every touch was a full stop, a verse, a new chapter. When Julian removed the pin from her hair and let it fall around her shoulders, Emma melted. Not because he touched her, but because he understood her. That night, they didn't just come close in distance, but in meaning. No one said the word love, but every glance, every fingertip carried a deeper whisper. I see you. And I'm staying. 3 days after that night, Emma was no longer quite herself. She still arrived on time, still straightened crooked books, still offered polite smiles to readers. But inside, she was a tangle of unnamed feelings. Clara, her co-worker and only real friend, gently pulled her into the break room. Emma, did you know Julian Hart was once married to a librarian? The question hit like a blow. Emma froze, staring as Clara held up an old article on her phone. Businessman Julian Hart and his book-loving wife at the opening of the children's library. The woman in the photo was beautiful, elegant, confident. Emma swallowed hard. She felt small, clumsy, replaceable. Maybe you're just another chapter in his familiar book, Clara said softly, not with malice, only concern. That evening, Julian texted, then called. Emma didn't answer. She didn't know how to ask. Am I real or just a repeat? On the fourth day, as she stepped out of the library after her shift, Julian was waiting, standing in the fading light of dusk. You're avoiding me, he said, not angry, just sad. Emma stood still. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Finally, she whispered, I heard. She was a librarian too. Julian nodded, stepping closer. She was. She loved books like decorations. You love them like living things. He paused, eyes holding hers. Emma, you're not like anyone else. You're not a repeat. You're the reason I started writing again. And in the silence that followed, the only thing Emma could hear was the rhythm of her own heart, beating like a freshly written stanza, raw, fragile, and impossible to ignore. That afternoon, the library felt quieter than usual. Sunlight tilted through the tall windows, laying golden stripes across the floor, like whispers of time. Emma had planned to visit her favorite reading corner to reorganize a few books, but as she approached, she stopped. A narrow path had been marked by folded ivory notes, each one handwritten like a personal letter. She opened them one by one. Each was a memory. The first time you handed me that forgotten poetry book. The moment my hand brushed your hair. The silence at the cafe that didn't need to be filled. The trail of paper led her to the hidden alcove on the third floor, the place where she used to read poems alone before he walked into her life. Julian was there, not as the powerful businessman she once saw from afar, but as a man carrying a heart written in real ink. He held out a leather-bound journal, voice low and trembling. I wrote it all down, the fragments of us. I don't want them to fade, like stories left untold. Emma turned the pages slowly. Inside were instant photos, his clumsy poems, tiny notes she once stuck on book spines, memories, breaths, love unspoken but ever present. The final page held a short poem. Among thousands of written lines, I found you, the first one that made me stop. No need for endings. Only the will to keep writing. With you. Below was a single line, write the rest with me. Julian knelt. No ring, no roses. Just eyes full of truth. Emma Wells, you are the most beautiful chapter in my life. Will you write the next one with me? Her tears answered before her voice could, and she whispered, like a poem she'd always carried inside, yes, I'm ready. A month later, in the library where it all began, they would stand before their favorite books and begin a new chapter, with vows, not verses. Emma's wedding day arrived like the next chapter in a well-loved book. That morning, spring sunlight poured through the window of the small apartment she now shared with Julian. The scent of his coffee drifted through the kitchen. Ordinary, tender, but today it carried something sacred. Clara helped Emma fix her hair, tying it loosely with a soft blue ribbon, the same shade as the first book Julian ever handed her. Her wedding dress was simple, ivory fabric that felt like worn pages, its lace edges embroidered with tiny verses only Emma could read. The ceremony took place at the library, where they had met, where love first whispered itself into being. There were no elaborate floral arrangements. Instead, rows of chairs were organized by the titles of the books they both cherished. A narrow aisle stretched between towers of novels, their covers facing outward like quiet witnesses. The scent of old pages lingered in the air, as if every book was holding its breath. Julian stood waiting at the end of that aisle, his eyes never leaving hers as she walked toward him. He didn't need to speak. His gaze said it all. The officiant's voice carried softly, "Today, among books and memories, we're not just witnessing a wedding, but the beginning of a story, real and still being written." When it was time to speak her vows, Emma didn't tremble. Her voice was steady, like pages coming alive. "I used to be invisible, but you saw me, not in light, but in stillness. You are the poem I was once afraid to write, and now I want to read it every day." Julian took her hand, and they kissed between the old shelves. There was no applause, just a hush, so deep it felt like a page turning, slowly, carefully, with hands that had waited a lifetime. Time passes, the old library had become the place where Emma now inspired those who once felt as silent as she did. Every Saturday, she hosted a creative writing group where untold stories found their first breath. Under the pen name The Quiet Verse, Emma's poetry began appearing in literary journals. Gentle, profound, and heartbreakingly honest. Her words didn't shout, they whispered. But anyone who read them stopped in their tracks. Julian still brought her coffee each morning, his smile unchanged. He never stopped looking at her the way he had that first day, in the way only someone who sees the soul, not the silhouette, ever could. In the small writing room of their apartment, a leather-bound journal rested at the center of their desk, the book of life they co-authored. Emma wrote in violet ink, Julian in fine black strokes. Fragments of conversation, stray verses, quotes scribbled from yesterday's walk, all had their place. One rainy afternoon, with the city blurred in soft fog, they sat beside each other, hand in hand, writing a page each. Julian looked over and whispered, "Love, like the finest stories, doesn't end. It continues, word by word, heart by heart." Emma smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. She was no longer the girl between the shelves. Now she was the story, and the pen kept moving,